I'd like to welcome you to today's GOC43 session, technical session, where we will be discussing the user management and alarming features. So this will include how to set this up and how to use the visualization objects for these features. So starting off, we'll start with our user management feature. So user management, it's used to define and control and monitor user access within a system or within a PLC or HMI. And this involves assigning roles, setting permissions, and ensuring that only authorized users can perform specific actions, thus enhancing your security and accountability. So the GOC43 supports user management as a feature, and this also means that you can configure user or access rights to visualization objects and controls on the GOC HMI. By default, there will be one of two configurations for your GOC. The first being the empty configuration that only contains a non-user group, and you are able to add more groups and users to this configuration. The second default is the default users and groups. So for this configuration or default configuration, there is an admin, service, and operator group, as well as a none group. And each of the first three, so the admin, service, and operator, have a user assigned to it with the same name. So under the admin group, there's an admin user. Under the service group, there's a service user. And under the operator group, there's an operator user. You are also able to add more groups as well as users to this default configuration, so you are not limited to just these groups and users. So with that being said, I will be moving over to codices. So when it comes to configuring your user management, so your groups and your users, this is done via the visualization manager, which you can find in your device tree, visualization manager, and when double clicking, it opens this window. So if you see, you have a few tabs here with options, the second last being user management. Now this is where you will configure your users, groups, and a few other settings pertaining to your user management. So if you see, you further in this window, you also have three tabs: groups, users, and settings. So starting off with the groups tab, this is where you configure your groups. So you configure whether the group needs to be logged out automatically. If so, how long or after what time should the user in this group be logged out, whether they have permission to change user data. So permission to change user data usually includes editing passwords or even adding new users directly on the GOC itself. If I expand, you can also see the users underneath each of these, or in each of these groups. So if you want to add a group here, you click on the empty field and enter the group name. Once you've done that, you can now control or set the settings for this group as well, and you will be able to assign users to this group in the users tab. So just to also go through the buttons at the bottom of this window. So if you have changed settings for one of these groups after you've already assigned access restrictions to certain or any of your visualization objects in your program, you can press this update visualization hotkeys to update these settings and have it applied to those visualization objects as well. So the list usage of groups, this indicates the visualization objects that you have applied access restrictions to. And to see this, you'll see it in your output window at the bottom here. So currently it says no elements or hotkeys found with access right restrictions. Of course, I have not set this up yet, but if you have any set up, this will display here. This will allow you to export your groups for global visualizations, and this option allows you to delete your complete user management. Just a note on the right hand side, this is used to export your user management to a CSV file, and you can also import your user management from a CSV file if you choose to do so. So just to show you as well, if I select the delete complete user management, it'll actually delete everything that has been configured, and it will allow me to choose between one of those two default options I mentioned earlier. So it'll either allow me to choose an empty user or the default groups that you have seen previously. So just as a demonstration, if I choose the empty one, you can now see the only group in this configuration is the none group. But for the purpose of today, I'll just be using the default groups. So I can see previously I added a group there, and it has also deleted that group. So next is the users tab. This is where you add users, set their passwords, set their names, and assign them to groups. So if you want to add a new user, you'd enter the name in an empty field, so most likely at the bottom, give it a full name, and this is just purely an example, and you can assign a password here. For today's demonstration, I think I'll just set a simple password so that I can show you how this works. And under the user group, you select what user group it should be assigned to. Note, whatever group you assign it to, those access restrictions will apply, as you'll see in a bit later on when I show you how to apply it to visualization objects. But yeah, I can set my group. So I want the new user to be assigned to the admin group, and I'm setting a password. So you can also choose to activate or deactivate a user. So this allows you to deactivate a user without deleting the information, and you will be able to activate it later on once you want to use that user again. Last but not least, you have your settings tab, and this allows you to set some general settings for your user management. The first of which is the settings of when to download user data to the GOC. So you can either choose download user data on every login, never download user data on login, or allow decision on every download. Largely, if you have changed any user information, so a password, added new users on the GOC itself, whenever you download that information to the GOC, it will overwrite whatever you have edited on the GOC itself. So it's generally a good idea to not do this if you have configured quite a bit on the GOC itself, in which you have the opportunity to read the user management files, apply it to your project or your program, and only then download, or just simply not download. user data. You also have login settings. This allows you to restrict the amount of times a user can try to log in. So if I select login restrictions, I can set the number of attempts I'm allowed to have for login. And you can also choose what the penalty will be once you've reached this maximum amount of attempts. So you can either choose a permanent lockout or a temporary lockout. And if you do select a temporary lockout, you can select the time frame after which you can try again. So next, you also have your access right for elements. So you select whether to use group hierarchy. In simple words, just for visual effect, I'll go back to the groups. In simpler terms, group hierarchy sets it up that the group at the top of the list, which in this case is admin, should always have higher access rights than the group on the lowest on the list. So for instance, admin should always be able to operate, whereas some of the others it should not be visible. Or for instance, whenever I set give operator the highest access rights, it automatically means all the other groups will also have the highest access rights. That is what group hierarchy, the group hierarchy setting does. But it is not necessary to choose this option if you don't wish to use it. But for demonstration purposes, I'll just be selecting it so that I can show it to you when we configure it later on. And the last setting you can set is whether to change to your start visualization when the user is logged out. So whenever user logs out, it can return to the start visualization. So that's all the settings you have for your user management and how you set up groups and users. Okay. So next, to actually use user management or use this feature in your program or on the GOC, you need to use the visualization objects assigned to it. So the user management feature has pre-built visualizations that facilitates its login, user configuration, and password change functionality, with the logout functionality not necessarily, or it doesn't have a visualization or doesn't require visualization either. However, even though the visualizations are available within your toolbox, even though your visualizations are available within this toolbox. So if you see here, these are the visualization objects that are used for your user management. Although you can access them directly in your visualization toolbox, the function how the GOC has implemented the use of these visualization objects are as pop-up windows. So you don't actually need to use this directly. To use these visualization objects and the functions associated with them, you actually use actions set to a button. So to show you this, let's add a button to the screen, and this will be our login button. So it will bring up the login visualization dialog, so pop-up screen. Now to give this button the login functionality, so you just go to input configuration within the properties window of the visualization object, and you select an applicable input configuration. For the purpose of this presentation, I will be choosing the on mouse click, and then this input configuration window will pop up. So if you see on the left hand side of this list, there's a user management option. So selecting this and moving it to the right hand side means that I'm using this action, or this is what's going to be executed when I press the login button, and I want the functionality to be login, which is already selected. So that is actually all you need to do to give this button the function of login. If I were to set up a log out button, so if this is our log out button, I just need to go back to the user management setup and change the action to be taken and to log out. Now, just to show you how this looks on the HMI itself, I will be using simulation, the Codesys simulation, just so that you can see the screen. Okay, so here's my HMI screen. If I press login, it will give me the pop-up window for the login, in which I can choose what user, or enter the user name and password. And once you've done that, press OK. And now I am logged in. If I want to log out, I just press log out. Now, for the other functions to add the other functions to Codesys, you just repeat the process of adding actions to the buttons. So if I want to add a user configuration button, I just go back to the input configuration and change from what it currently is login to change or open user configuration. And the other option or other action we can take for the user management is change password, which once again go to the input configuration and change user password. So now pressing the change user password or change password button, it will bring up the change user password dialog, and the same for the user configuration. When pressing that button, it will bring up the user configuration dialog. Now, if you noticed in the example, or when I ran the simulation to show you how the login works and how the pop-up screen comes up, you weren't actually able to see what user is currently logged in. Now you are able to display or see what user is logged in, and to do this you simply can add a shape to the screen, and let's say this is current user, and then I'll add a placeholder for a strings. So this means that where this percentage is currently, or currently is, the username will display. But for the username to display, I need to set what variable needs to fill that placeholder. To do this, you go to text variables, and to see the current user, it's a function within Codesys, visualisation, current, its current full user. Did I make a... It's current full username. So now if I do log in, it will actually display what user is currently logged in. So just to show you this, it's bold. Okay, so now you can see no users currently logged in, so it does not display anything. Once I do log in, for instance here, it now displays what users logged in. So if I press log out, say log in again, and now log in as admin, it will change to admin when I'm logged in as such. So that is how to display what user is currently logged in. And just to show you, for the user configuration, you are able to see all the users configured. You can change their passwords, even edit their names and full names, or you can enter a new user. So if I want to add a new user, you select on an empty field on that list, and then add the information in the fields below. So once you've given the new user a name, a full name, and password, and acknowledge the password, you can select the user group. For instance, let's say this one is service, and you can also select whether your users should be activated or deactivated. Now, if you notice, this actually looks a lot similar to what was in the visualization manager tab for the users, because it's the exact same settings. So whenever you want, if I now want to apply this new user to the user management, you just select this add or insert user button here, and it will now add the user to the list. Equally, you can also choose to delete a user by pressing the X next to it. So let's say I want to delete the user I just added. I select delete user, which it now has done. And just to show you the change password dialog or pop-up screen, it's just allows you to enter your old password. So you do need your old password to be able to change the password. So without that, you will not be able, and you have to go to your user management settings in CodeAssist to be able to change it. Otherwise, but yeah, you can enter a new password and apply it to this user specifically. If you want to edit a different user's password, either use the user configuration or log in with the user that you want to change the password for, and log in with with those credentials, so to say. Now, I set up the actions, so the login, log out, user configuration, and change password actions for my user management. But now we can apply this to a visualization object. So as an example, I'll be using, let's say this is a start button for something, and if I want to add access restrictions or access rights to this visualization object, I go to my properties window. When you select your visualization update, you can see the properties window, and at the very bottom you'll have something that says access rights, and as you can see currently it's not set for this visualization objects, meaning no matter what user is logged in, no matter what user is logged in or whether no user is logged in, they have full access rights. So clicking on access rights, you'll see that all groups are able to operate this visualization object, and you can also set only visible or completely invisible. So if you recall, I have selected group hierarchy, and I mentioned that the group at the top of the list, in this case being the admin group, needs to always have higher priority or higher access rights than those beneath it. And that is applicable to each of them. So what this means is if I select admin to be operable, I cannot okay, better example. If I select admin to be only visible, I cannot select operator to be operable, because that will automatically set those above them, the groups above them, to also have the operable access rights. Whenever you deselect group hierarchy, this does not apply. You can set it as you wish. To see whether you have your group hierarchy activated, you can just look here. It will show you whether it's activated or not, to see whether if these settings aren't acting as you think or expected them to. So that's why if I do this, it automatically changes to operable for the admin and servers as well. So for today's example, I'll just select operable for both the admin and servers, and only visible for the operator, and invisible if no user is logged in. As a separate example, you can generally set this or these access rights to any visualization objects with the access rights field. So for instance, if I want to display a value, also set it to this. So let's say this is a value input where I want to input a integer. And I want to be able to input it, so I choose to write a variable okay. So now I can add access rights to this visualization object as well by once again going to the access rights field and selecting or choosing my settings here. So now that we've added access rights to visualization objects, let's see how they behave once we go to our simulator. Okay, so if I log in, so you currently can't see either the start or the input field for the integer, but as I set this to be invisible when no user is logged in. But if I do log in as, let's say, the admin, those buttons will now show, and I'm actually also able to operate them because I have set the administrator or the admin to be, or to have operable access rights to these visualization objects. So I'm able to press, also able to input a value in this field. So that's actually all for the user management feature, and that is all you need to set the user management feature up. Yeah. So next we will be discussing the alarming feature of the GOC, which is also a built-in feature with built-in visualizations. So to start off, there are 3 types of alarms that can be configured for the GOC. The first being an acknowledgeable alarm. This is an alarm that needs to be acknowledged before returning to normal state once it's deactivated. The second type of alarm that you can configure is a report-only alarm. So contrary to the acknowledgeable alarm, this alarm moves directly to the normal state once it has been deactivated. The type of alarm you can configure is the archivable. So this means that the alarm is stored within the history table, and the history table archives all states. This history table can archive up to 256 alarms, and just as a general note, you are able to configure up to 64 alarms for the GOC. Now, note is when it comes to these types of alarms, you can either configure an acknowledgeable alarm or a report-only alarm. Those are mutually exclusive, meaning you can't have an alarm that is both report-only and acknowledgeable. However, either an acknowledgeable alarm can either be, not either be, can both be acknowledgeable and archivable, as well as the report-only alarm can be report-only and archivable. So those settings can cross. Now, there are generally 2 to 3 states in an alarm cycle, and these states are the active state. So the active state is when the alarm is actively being triggered, so when the alarm condition is actively on. The wait act state, so this is the wait for acknowledgement state. This is the state when the alarm is no longer active, but this is an acknowledgeable alarm, so the alarm is waiting for user acknowledgement before returning to your normal state. So report-only alarms will never enter the wait acknowledge state. And the last state is the normal state. So this is either the initial state of the alarm, so before its alarm has been triggered, or it is the state after the alarm has been deactivated, whether this is report only, whether it instantly returns to the state, or whether it's been acknowledged by the user and returns to the normal state. If one or more of your alarms are in the active state, the system variable sysalarm.alarm active act, which is of type bool, turns on. And similarly, if one or more of your alarms are either in active or wait acknowledgement state, the applicable system variable here will turn on as well. Now, just to show you how the alarm states transition. Now, this diagram here is applicable to the report only alarm. So initially on startup, your alarm will start on normal if it has not been triggered yet. So, and when the alarm is triggered, it moves to active. And once the alarm condition or state has been resolved, it will then return back to normal. Quite simple. However, when you have an acknowledgeable alarm, you now have three states, so it will move between these three states. Now, how it moves, once again, it starts on normal when it's not yet been triggered, and when triggered, it also moves to active, which is similar to the report only. When it is deactivated, however, it now goes to the wait acknowledge state, and when it's in the wait acknowledge state, it can do either of two things. If the user acknowledges it, it will go back to normal, or if if the alarm once again activates, it will actually return back to the active state. Now, just some other things. When the GOC is the power to the GOC is cycled, the alarms on the table is cleared. So any alarms on the table, any alarms on the banners are cleared. When the power is restored to the GOC, if the alarm still remains active, they will once again be displayed on the alarm table or banner. However, when it comes to your alarm history table, this is actually not cleared on a power cycle, as this information is retained. Now, if you wish to clear the alarm history table, you would execute the clear alarm log function right here. Apologies, in structured text. Now, just something to note, because we are using the simulator for today's demonstration, because it's easier for me to show you the screen that way. This function does not work in the simulator, but it does work on the actual GOC. So I will show you how to set it up today, although using the simulator it won't work. Now, from the specification section, you know there is system variables that are assigned to the alarming feature, and these system variables facilitate the triggering and monitoring of alarm states. Apologies. So the first system variable used for the alarms is the dot trigger. So it's underscore sys var alarm dot trigger. Now that's your first system variable, and this is a long word, so this is a 64-bit variable. Now this variable is actually used to trigger your alarms. How this works is the first bit, so bit 0 actually represents alarm number 0, with the 63rd bit representing alarm number 63. So this is also why you are only able to configure 64 alarms for the GOC. And to activate an alarm, you need to turn on the corresponding bit. So to turn on alarm 0, bit 0 of this system variable needs to be turned on. Next, you have your alarm banner display priority. So using this variable, you can set whether certain alarms should have a higher priority for display as compared to not having a priority for display. So when this variable is set to true, the variable of the alarms higher on the list. So let's say alarm number 0 will always display before alarm number 63 if both are active at the same time. So this specifically applies to your alarm banner. The next system variable is the alarm active variable, which we discussed. So this variable is true if any of the 64 alarms are in an active state. If this is false, no alarms are in the active state, and the alarms are either in a wait acknowledgement state or a normal state. The alarm active acknowledge system variable is true when any of the 64 alarms are either in your active or wait acknowledgement state, and is only false when all alarms are in the normal state. So these are the system variables assigned to the alarming feature of the GOC. Now, before we go into the configuration of the alarms, there are a few prerequisites that need to be taken a look at or given attention before setting up alarming. And this is actually similar to what we discussed in the previous session. That was for the data logging. So one, the PLC settings need to be configured. If the PLC settings aren't configured to the recommended settings in the GOC manual, the alarming might not function as should or might not function at all. Second, the RTC, so the time and date of the GOC, needs to be healthy and accurate. So you'll need to check whether the status is okay on the system menu. And you need to ensure that your date and time is accurate, because if your date and time is not accurate, the date and time stamps will be inaccurate for your alarming as well. We discussed where to set the date and time and how to check on the status in the previous technical session. So now to start the configuration of our alarming, this is done via the device editor window. So if you go to your device tree and select device at the very top, and then go to the alarm configurator tab. This is where you edit or add or delete your alarms. So if I want to add an alarm, I select the add button, and this add alarm data pop-up screen shows up. This also indicates what number alarm you are currently adding. So if you see, I'm currently adding alarm number 0, which, if you remember, corresponds to what bit needs to be activated for this alarm to be active, which is something important to remember when setting up alarms for the GOC. So the settings I can set for this are the enable alarm. So this will enable or disable. So if not selected, this will disable the alarm, even though the alarm information is not deleted. So you enable alarm, and let's say, for instance, we want so you have a maximum of 16 characters for your alarm name. So if I show you this, there's a certain point to which I will no longer be able to add. So generally, you would want to use abbreviations for your alarm name, and then for your message, you are able to add up to 32 characters, so at least a bit more. So let's say, for instance, this is a low-level alarm that I want to set up, and you also have now the option to set this as an acknowledgeable alarm. So without selecting acknowledge here, Without selecting this, it would be a report only alarm. With selecting it, it is an acknowledgeable alarm. Similarly, selecting archiving will mean that whenever all these states, every time this alarm's state changes, it will be recorded in your alarm history. So that means any state change will be recorded. So if you select this alarm will be archived. So I will be leaving this alarm as a report only alarm that can be archived. And let's say add a second alarm. And I'll be setting this as an acknowledgeable alarm as well as an archivable alarm. So if these are my two alarms or the alarms that I set, I am able to edit the list entries or any of these alarms by selecting edit, and it will actually bring up the same pop-up screen that you saw when I was entering a new alarm, and it will allow you to edit any of the details of the alarm. I'm also able to select delete, so delete one specific alarm from the list entry, and I'm also able to move an alarm up and down the list, which once again, the alarm number, so the number alarm that it is on this list does correspond to what bit needs to be activated for the alarm to be active. So doing this, if you're ever editing this, keep this in mind because this does affect your programming. Yeah. So let's move on to the programming. So how you would actually trigger alarm bits. So I mentioned that the alarm bits are triggered by by the system variable, and to do this I'll just use a normal ladder contact and coil, or actually I would like to use an inline compare actually. So I'm going to be using the variable that I input here and looking at what value this variable is. If it's higher or lower than a certain value, I want to trigger one of my two alarms. So to do this, I'd use a math operator, and for the first one, if it's less or equal, and let's add our always on. I'll just add true, so that is also always on. And I'm looking at this variable that I input. And if this is less or equal than 5, I want to trigger my alarm. So to browse in the alarm bit, you select the action button, go to IO config globals, and go to the sysvar alarm, expand that. And if you recall, the correct variable is the trigger variable. So selecting that, now this will point to the whole long word, so the whole 32-bit, 64-bit integer. So you will have to specify what bit with the dot operator, which for us, or for this example, it will be bit 0 for the low level alarm. So that's how you set it up. So now for our high level alarm, I want it to be greater or equal, and I will choose 90 as that threshold. You're looking at the same variable, but now I want to trigger alarm 1. So that is how you would trigger your alarms. Obviously, if you have more alarms, you'll have more triggers. And once again, the bit you trigger is um, the bit you trigger corresponds to the alarm number you see in your alarm configurator. So this is alarm number 0 and this is alarm number 1. So that is how the programming works for the alarms. Now, if you recall, I also mentioned that there are pre-built visualizations available for the alarming feature, which you are able to find in the GOC43 extern category in your visualization toolbox. So you have an alarm table as well as a banner option. Well, actually, you have two banner options, with the difference between the two banner options being that the second one here displays the state of the alarm, whereas the first one does not. If you also notice, these visualization objects are actually transparent, so except from the buttons and the table itself and the text, these are transparent options, so you can overlay this alarm table and banner over a shape and you can select any color you wish. So for today I'll be I'll add another screen to which we can navigate to for the alarms. So let's add an alarm screen. Actually, that's the wrong one. Visualization, and we want the screen to be for the alarms. Okay. So first up, I'll just be setting up some navigation to the alarm screen. And on the alarm screen, I'll just add a button for it to be able to go back to the home screen. Okay, so on my alarm screen, I'll be adding the alarm table. Let's add the alarm table. And to give it some color, we'll overlay this over a basic rectangle shape. So choosing a color for your rectangle. Let's give it this color. Okay, so now I've sized them correctly. I can add this to my screen. Let's group them first. Sorry. Okay, now they are sized more appropriately. So once you've added the visualizations, you actually don't need to configure it. It is automatically configured. It's pre-configured to display your alarms. So all you actually have to do is add this to a visualization screen for this to work. Just to show you as well, let's add a banner to the home screen. Okay. So if that is our banner, I actually don't need to do anything else. So let's demonstrate this. So I will have to log in to be able to access that input once again. Let's log in as admin. So if you now see my alarm, and because my value is currently 0, which is below the threshold of 5 that we set, or that I've set, you'll see the alarm display on the alarm table. You'll also see it display on the alarm banner as well. So if I set this to 25, you can see the alarm now disappears. So if you recall, I set up the low level alarm as a report only alarm, and thus it does not go to the await acknowledge state and immediately goes to the normal state. Now to look at the alarm history, you just select the history, and whenever this button is red, it means you are currently viewing the alarm history. So you can actually see what time my alarm activated and what time it returned to the normal state. So if I trigger the high level alarm by entering that there, you can now see the high level alarm has triggered. And if I go to my PLC program, you can see that this is currently active. Now going to my table, you can also see the alarm there, and you will also see it has gone to active in the history. Now, if I now take it out of the alarm condition, so let's say 80, you will see it does not immediately disappear. It changes to wait act, so wait acknowledgement, and to acknowledge it, you can either select acknowledge visible, so this will acknowledge any of the visible alarms on the table, excuse me, or you can select the applicable alarm to acknowledge, which you do like that. And if I now check my history table, you'll actually see the high level alarm active, and then wait acknowledgement state, and then finally the normal state. So you'll see every state change in your history table. Now that is, as I said, you don't need to configure your visualization objects to be able to do this. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that the alarm history table can be cleared by the user. And to do this, you have one or two options. So if you recall, it's you need to execute the clear alarm log function, and you do this via structured text. So you can execute structured text for this in quite a few ways, but some of the ways that I would recommend is either using an inline execute block, in which you just say clear alarms log like that, and whenever this block is executed, the alarm history will be cleared. Or alternatively, if you don't want to do this in your PLC programming itself, you can also actually add a button which executes this function for you. So, for example, if I add a button to my alarming screen that says clear alarm history, and add the input or change the input configuration to write or execute structured code, I can now enter the same thing here, and whenever this button is pressed, it will actually execute this piece of structured text. So once again, when I now press this button, the alarm history will be cleared. But as I mentioned before, having tested this myself, it does not work within the Codesys simulator, but on the actual GOC itself, it does indeed work. So it does actually clear your alarm history table. That And that is actually the end of the presentation for today. And of course, there's actually nothing else you can do with alarming. It's quite simple feature which you can use for the GOC. So with that being said, are there any questions regarding today's session? So just to highlight, the next session for the GOC, so in the series, will be on the topic of CC-Link iField Basic and Modbus TCP configurations for controlling a E800 BSD, so the E800 Mitsubishi Electric BSD, and this will be on the 1st of October of this year in the normal time slot of 10 to 11:30.